Welcome, everyone, to One is Enough, the official podcast of the National Kidney Registry. As promised, I am continuing my interview with neuroscientist, psychologist, and Professor Abigail Marsh in part 2 of our first episode of the new year. Thank you for listening in as we resume our conversation about altruism and how it influences living kidney donation. So, and this is, it's still to this day, even if it ties into the question because, we did this thing, okay, great. And then we feel like it was, dare I say, so easy. I understand there's a whole process behind it, but it was fairly, an easy process. So I want to share that story, right? So I can, help educate other people and maybe, motivate other people. And there are kidney donors that don't want to share the story because they don't want to be seen as, glorifying like what they did. That you're almost meant to feel like ashamed, that if I say I'm a kidney donor, like you're like you don't want to say it, right? People
maybe it turned into the bad art friend story.
Yeah, I don't mind talking about it, but someone will say, "Oh, dude, have you met Michael? He donated his kidney," and I'm like, well, yeah, it was no big deal, So I want to pick your brain on how it makes other people feel. So, from a personal standpoint, I don't know if I've told this part before, but my family was not. I did not receive a positive response from anybody. My sister's a nurse. My aunt's a physician's assistant. My mother was not pleased, whatsoever. I remember I called my grandmother to tell her. My mother's like, "You got to tell your grandmother." I said, "Okay." So I called her up and I said, "Hey, Gram," I said, just wanted to let you know that I'm gonna, be donating my kidney to a stranger in December, and her immediate response was, and I don't even think I've even heard the term altruistic, to be quite honest. Her immediate response was, she said, "You are trying to feed something in your head." She goes, "You are not altruistic." And I said,
"Grandma."
Okay. I said, "All right, well, listen." I said, "Well, listen, we're going to agree to disagree." I said, "I just wanted you to hear from me that, I was going to be going through this, and, I hope you have a great day." My mother was, very against it. And I sent her, Ned Brooks's video. And, now mind you, I was 46 at the time. So it's not like I'm a 17, 18-year-old, kid who comes home and says, "I want to, get a kidney taken out of my body so I can give it to a stranger." I would have thought that they would have, thought more of me for doing the research, right? Now my aunt and my sister, they work in the medical profession, and I think they have some other insight about maybe things that go on in the medical profession. So I think their fears were related to that. But I did hear, one of the things was, well, how do you know who's going to get your kidney? What if, you're a cop. At the time I was a detective with the NYPD. What if it goes to a criminal, And I said, well, if they're on the list, then that means they need the kidney. And at the time I was working with, I was helping out on the detail with Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York. And I told him about this. We were having, it was like in his private residence. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to, be donating my kidney." And I told him about what the reaction was that, I was getting from people that maybe the person who receives it doesn't deserve it. And I remember Cardinal Dolan, of course. I mean, what else would Cardinal Dolan say? He said, "That's for God to decide, right? Who deserves to, to get your kidney or this gift. That's not for us to decide." I had no, but anyway, so it's a long-winded question, but why do these people who react this way have small amygdalas? Like why do us kidney donors get this reaction from family and friends? Like, "You're nuts. This is a terrible idea."
Yeah.
What have you had experience with that or any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it relates to something called, egocentric bias or consensus bias, which is that we just tend to assume that other people's internal experiences are like our own. which is usually true, because of the nature of like standard distributions. Like most people tend to cluster toward the middle of most traits and, tail off toward the ends. But that means that if you are somebody who is a little bit unusual, for example, having a strong desire to donate a kidney to a stranger is just statistically unusual.
Sure.
It's going to be hard for other people who are in the, other places on that continuum to understand the motivation because they don't have it. They can't imagine having that desire. And so it's a pretty common thing, I think, for people who cannot imagine having that same desire themselves to label anybody with that desire crazy or to assume it's something else that they can imagine. They're like, well, I cannot fathom having the desire to give up my own kidney for a stranger, but I can imagine wanting other people to praise me and fawn over me, know? And so I'm going to assume it's something that it's easier for me to imagine than for something I can't. I really think that that's a big part of it. And so I do, especially people who, when they hear about my research, they're like, I just believe it's got to be some self-serving motive at root. I'm like, well,
sure.
You just told me a lot about yourself. Like, yeah, more than anything. I now know that you are not the sort of person who can imagine having, a strong enough altruistic motivation. So thanks.
So Ned Brooks was my mentor, although we didn't have a mentor program. I didn't call them mentors at the time. I simply called him my kidney guy. And when I got this response from numerous people, I went back to Ned and I said, Ned, like, this is the response I'm getting. And he said something very, very similar to you. His take on it was, by you telling them this and you doing this, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, you make them feel bad, if you will, that like they can't even think of doing something like that. Like that would, like, it wouldn't, not that they're bad people. That's not something that would cross their mind. So it's almost like
do-gooder derogation. It's got a name and everything.
Oh my, you got a name for everything, you psychologists. Do-gooder what? What is that?
It's called do-gooder derogation.
I gotta write that down and look that up. Do-gooder derogation. Okay.
Yep. And it's pretty common anytime, people are breaking the norms of pro-social behavior, especially for people who are sort of at the lower end. They don't like the norms being shifted. And it's like, well, now I'm going to be expected to do more to be able to, because people do understand that like there is a little bit of moral status that's acquired by being a good person. And, they don't want to fall to the bottom of that hierarchy by other people pushing the curve up. And I find it a very interesting individual difference that some people hear about altruistic kidney donation and feel a sense of how beautiful it is and inspired by it. And, like that's how I feel. And other people, it makes them feel bad about themselves. And it's not everybody has that feeling bad about themselves, but I've definitely met other people who are like, I don't want to think about this. It makes me feel really bad about myself. I'm like, why? But as we've talked about, we know some of the reasons why probably.
Yeah. I've been asked, by several donors that I've mentored, and what should I tell my story? And what I say is, listen, there are going to be people who are, going to, maybe put you down about it or tell you that you're crazy, and some of these donors just didn't want to put themselves out there. But I say, obviously, because I've been talking about it since December of 2018, you just keep telling that story. Because, you're only able to donate that one kidney because one is enough. But the story that you tell will go on and on. And I personally have had validation where people have read or seen or heard my story and ultimately have donated. So, that is an amazing feeling when someone says, oh, I heard your story and it inspired me. And I, I started looking into it, and next thing you know, that they actually donated. I'm like, I'm never shutting up. It's hard to get me to be quiet anyway. But as far as kidney donation, forget about it. Like I'm never, until I can't talk anymore, I'm not gonna stop telling the story.
Yeah, and that is truly an altruistic thing to do as well, because as you've talked about, people sometimes are suspicious that people talk about their kidney donation to try to get acclaim or praise. And there was that horrible bad art friend story in the New York Times. The article itself was good. Did you read this article about, I'm not going to go into the details, but I heard a lot about it from many altruistic kidney donors after it came out. It was about two friends in the publishing world. Well, frenemies.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, the crux of the story was that the woman who had been an altruistic kidney donor was being a narcissistic, attention-seeking, crazy person by talking about it broadly.
I know.
And I really felt, you know, I try not to weigh in on political stuff at all when it comes to social media, or anything that could just be construed as, you know, putting down some people or something. I really try to avoid that. But I really felt compelled to weigh in on this particular story because I felt like so many donors had contacted me saying, this makes me feel like everybody assumes I'm a horrible narcissist when I talk about my donation. And so I wanted to come out there and say, like, everything in my data shows me that the opposite tends to be true, that altruists are unusually humble. They only talk about their donation to try to help other people, you know, think about it as a possibility and to normalize it, because that's the difference between thinking a particular behavior is crazy versus like a perfectly understandable response is how common it is. The more people that we encounter who we know have donated a kidney, the more people are like, well, that seems like something a person might do. I mean, there are places in the world where donating blood is considered crazy just because not enough people do it.
I can't donate blood. I donated blood once in my entire life. I had a terrible experience. Unfortunately, it's a story for another day, and ever since that time, I passed out when I get blood taken. I passed out. Yeah, I told the story before. I passed out when I got my blood taken for the kidney donation. But the only surgery I ever had was the kidney donation. Never had surgery before. So, a lot of fainting stories.
You clearly cannot donate blood. But I mean, there are places in the world where people think it's crazy to donate blood to strangers, right? Why would you ever open up your veins to so your blood can go to a stranger? That's wild, right? And it used to be considered crazy here. And then once it hits a certain threshold of, you know, people thinking, well, this is a thing people do, then suddenly what seemed crazy seems like a totally normal thing. So, and then it becomes a virtuous cycle. Then more and more people are willing to do it. So keep talking.
we need kidney donation to be mainstream, like you said, like blood donation is. But, you know, part of the problem is the transplant centers themselves still view Good Samaritan donors as, dare I say, a little bit crazy, right? So if you're donating to someone that you know, a relative, you have one stop at a social worker, right? And you have the conversation to make sure you're not being coerced and or paid, and you're doing it for the right reasons. But if you're a Good Samaritan donor, you got to stop and see the psychologist too. Right. So even within the industry, we got to really make sure that this person is not nuts. Right. Because why would they want to go through this procedure that they don't need to have an organ removed from their body to give it to someone that they don't know? So we have a lot of work to do, I think, to change the thought process, even within the transplant industry.
Absolutely. And I know there are transplant centers where the medical criteria for donating to a stranger are stricter. You know, like your blood pressure has to be even lower, and, you know, other numbers have to be even better if you want to donate to a stranger than if you donate to a relative. That to me seems silly. You know, it just feels like you should have one criterion. If you're healthy enough to donate, no matter who the recipient is.
I completely agree. In one of your books, you wrote about how unusually easy it was to get non-directed donors to participate in the research, which I am not surprised because donors love to be involved and things like that. So what other surprising traits do altruistic donors, tend to display? And was it easy to peg, or is it easy to peg an altruistic donor? So if you had a room full of people, can you go, number 2, you're altruistic. Number 20, you're altruistic. Are you that good, Abby, that you can walk down the street and go altruistic?
Not at all. I wish.
No?
Right? That would be an amazing recruitment tool. No, I'm not good at it. And, I'm thinking of people who I've known over the years who I later went on to discover that they either were in the process of becoming a donor or had donated. And it almost always takes me by surprise. Because again, there's no real stereotype that donors fit on almost any axis, except they actually care more about other people. And that is not a trait that announces itself. There are some donors who are kind of taciturn and grumpy. There are some who, might be in the autism spectrum and might seem, socially different in those ways. There are, people who seem, who have jobs that are associated with altruism, like they take care of homeless animals, and other people who have jobs that don't seem at all altruistic. I mean, there really is there's no template that I would say altruistic donors fit at all, other than having this strong, sort of intuitive belief in the value of other people, and not believing that there are some people who are just so bad that they don't deserve to live. Kind of like the conversation you had with the cardinal. And that's it. But that is not a trait that announces itself. You just never know who out there could be an extraordinary altruist that you don't peg. Me too.
So that's exactly what I've been saying, but no one's listening to me. So, if you go to, OPTN, it's like a government website. I don't even know the letter stand for, organ OPTN. I don't know what it stands for. Just go to OPTN.
Procurement and transplantation or something?
Yeah, anyway. Something like that. But they're the ones that have all the data for the people in the United States who donated in various ways. And there are only 300 today, about 350 to 400 people donate truly as a Good Samaritan donor out of the 6,000 or so that donate, approximately 6,000 that donate each year. That's a super small number. So it seems very logical that if we want to increase living kidney donation, if we took that 400 and we could turn it into 800 or 1,400, that's the key, right? But the problem is it's going to take money, like a lot of money. So I feel that there are donors all over the United States of America, right? Because I think it's like 200 million people over the age of 21, right, in the United States. They just don't know. They need to be awoken, right? They need to, because that's, when the hardest question for a Good Samaritan donor to answer is, well, why did you donate to a stranger? And it's very difficult to put into words, but it's usually like a moment, right? It's you didn't know anything about it, and then you saw the news story, you saw the flyer, and in the deli, you saw a Facebook post, and it triggered something. Talk. Yeah, you heard a TED talk. That's right.
Or Ned's interview. That's
oh my gosh, that's I love that. Well, we send that to like everybody who looking to be a kidney donor because
he's really
awesome.
good. I feel like he's
why would you donate a kidney to why would you donate a kidney? Why would you donate a perfectly good kidney to a stranger? I think is the name of the TED talk. So how do we like wake up all these people? I really think the government should be doing PSAs, not saying, hey, give me your organ, but more of like, this is like, you could do this, right? You could help because how many, health problems are there in the United States that we have a cure, right? So there's, about 100,000 people on the wait list. There are 400,000 or 500,000 people on dialysis who, definitely, I'm sure would love to get a kidney and be off dialysis. But if you focus on the wait list, we have the answer. It's living kidney donation, and we have the numbers. There's 200 million people, right? So if like less than half of 1% of the population gets tested, we could probably eradicate the list. Yeah. So what's the advice that you have on waking up all these sleeping donors, as I like to call them?
Well, from the evidence I've seen, the number of people who will actually be convinced to donate, who are eligible, medically eligible, is not everybody, obviously. And so the best way to do it would be to be targeted in our Get Out the Word campaigns. Sure. And what I've suggested in the past, and I was involved with a project that NKDO did that basically verified what I had suspected, which felt really good because it felt like, I've learned something valuable over the last 10 years of doing this work, is that, the people who are most likely to donate kidneys have some features that, if you know about their history, are predictive. Being a frequent blood donor is definitely up there. Signing up for the Marrow Registry or having donated marrow is up there. And being like a vegan or vegetarian also seems to be up there.
Oh, no, Abby, really? Gosh, Elaine Perlman is my biggest vegan friend, and if she hears this podcast, she's gonna be very happy that you said that.
Yeah, and again, like lots of donors are none of those things, but like definitely.
Yeah, I eat meat. Just for the record, I eat meat.
Like I said, vegan. We all have our ways of contributing.
She's trying to convert me though. Elaine's like, you gotta go vegan. I'm like,
Yeah, I'm not vegan. I actually think that veganism is a little too far from the way we evolve. However, I don't eat meat. I don't eat mammals.
So this is what I told Elaine. I went to a function. We were at a a retreat, if you will, and there was a bunch of vegans there, and they prepared all the food, and I tried everything that they prepared, and it was delicious. I'm lazy. It's just I'm lazy, and I don't want to do all this prep work. I just want to like take a steak, throw it on the grill with a little salt and pepper, and then cut it up. But the food, as far as taste goes, it's delicious.
Yeah. I don't like meat either, so that it really wasn't hard to give it up. It doesn't bother me at all. But, partly it's also, there's a whole huge literature on this, but it's really hard for people to override taste preferences that developed early in childhood. So if people ate a lot of meat in childhood, it's just really, really hard to get them to switch to a diet with no meat. It's not no people, but like it's hard. And to get people to switch to any diet that's very different than the diet they grew up on. I think there's really something deep in our brains that we get our food patterns set pretty early in life, and you can change people, but we also shouldn't expect miracles. And I think the same is true for people who are likely to be kidney donors. People who are highly psychopathic are just unlikely to ever want to bother. But there are lots of people who I think are in that bubble who donating a kidney is within the window of possibility for them.
Sure.
And the things that seem to make the biggest difference are having had enough similar prior experiences that it starts seeming attainable. So if you do a lot of blood or marrow or plasma donation, or not a lot of marrow, but you know what I mean, then it's like, well, this is the thing you do. Like you go to the hospital, you get a bunch of tests, they take something out of your body, somebody else gets to live who wouldn't have lived otherwise. And that feels awesome. And I'm so glad I did it looking back. And then the next time something like that crops up, it feels that much more attainable. I also think that social norms are huge, and especially hearing the message from people who are like yourself seems to matter a lot. And so this is why it's important for lots of different donors to get the message out that like, I did this, like it was totally not that big a deal. Because, for people who were like you in some way, like other, former police officers or detectives or something people from your same high school or whatever who have something in common with you, you are a particularly effective, messenger for them. I was just reading something the other day about somebody who, was trying to convince a friend to get the COVID vaccine booster. And the friend didn't want the booster, but he really liked the band The Offspring. And it turns out that the leader of The Offspring, the band, has a PhD and has done like mRNA research.
Wow.
And hearing that guy is like, yay mRNA and yay COVID vaccine, this Offspring fan was like, oh, all right.
There's a connection. Yeah.
So it often takes hearing the message from somebody that you connect with and that you feel like, well, if they think it's okay, then I think maybe I could change my mind.
In one of your recent publications, you found correlations between altruism and well-being, things like high life satisfaction and having more positive and negative thoughts throughout the day. Can anyone take up altruistic behaviors in order to get the benefits of a higher well-being?
Well, it does seem that there's a nice bi-directional relationship between altruism and well-being. So when people are experiencing higher levels of well-being, they seem to be more altruistic on average. And also, people pretty reliably report that helping other people increases their well-being. So yes, if you are looking for a way to feel a higher sense of life satisfaction, happier with your life, I highly, highly recommend helping other people as a route to get there. It does have to be intrinsically motivated. It turns out that if you're forced to help somebody else, or you're helping them for some motive that isn't about really helping, it doesn't seem to have the same effect. So it does have to come, from an intrinsic motivation to help. But
so if you're like shamed into doing it.
That doesn't work. Not at all.
Shamed altruism.
Don't shame your grandma into donating a kidney. That's not the way to do it. But if it comes from a place of truly wanting to help, it really definitely helps improve your own well-being. Like so much more than doing something to benefit yourself will.
So, we talk about shaming people. I speak to patients quite often as well. And it's, very troubling that they have their family around them, their close friends around them. And they almost expect that these people around them should be going to get tested, right? Because you love me and wouldn't you want to help me? And, so why are you not going to get tested? I even had experiences where people told their family members they were going to get tested, and then they're calling me and saying, John says he hasn't heard from the transplant center. And, I call the transplant center and they, without violating any HIPAA or anything like that, they go, there isn't anyone being tested, for this particular person at this time. Oh. So, so it's an interesting, dynamic, because you would think that these family members would want to. So when I'm counseling them or, coaching them, I tell them it is a major decision, although, and I'm very careful now when I tell my journey or my story, because I had such a great experience, and for the most part, it was fairly easy. And a few of us, good Samaritan donors get very high energy, and I walk around the streets of New York or city or Long Island, going, why do these people have two kidneys? What are they doing walking around? Because I have X-ray vision, so I could tell that they have two kidneys, and I'm like, what is going on? These people should be donating that organ. But I tell them that it's obviously a very personal decision. Yep. You can't force someone to donate or shame them, into donating. But what do you have any experience with that, where family members are almost feel bad and they start doing the evaluation process? I'm hoping during the social evaluation or psych evaluation that would come out, and I'm assuming the transplant center would not want them to go forward. But
yeah, I would say I've only heard a couple of these stories sort of anecdotally through the years, because, so often the altruistic kidney donors that I work with don't know much about the backstory of the recipient. And often I do think there are, some bioethicists who aren't comfortable with a person getting a kidney from an altruistic donor if they do have family members who won't even get tested, Like, you really should have you should tap out your social circle before you are able to go to an altruist. And, I'm not a bioethicist, so I think that's a hard call to make. But, I know it does happen, and it's got to be a terrible situation to be in as a patient.
So, Abby, before we close out the podcast, is there anything that we didn't discuss or anything that you want to say before I give my closing remarks?
No, I think we really covered a huge amount of ground, and I think this got to everything that I wanted to talk about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to thank Abigail, or Abby, for joining me today, and I encourage anyone who is interested to visit Abigail's website, Abigail Marsh, AbigailMarsh.com, to learn more about her research and even participate in her lab's research studies. Your amygdala can be sized up, and I think I'm gonna hit you up. I want to see what my amygdala is, big or small or what. The kidney transplant community is truly indebted to her for her study of altruistic behavior. I also want to thank all of our listeners, the millions that we have out there, for joining us today. We really hope that today's episode was thought-provoking, informative, and inspiring. And of course, I always like to add a bit of humor, so hopefully you laughed once or twice. If you're looking for more information on living kidney donation, or you'd like to start the process of being screened as a potential donor, please visit kidneyregistry.org. You can learn more about the podcast by visiting kidneyregistry.org/1. When you're there, you can sign up to be on our email list so that you'll be the first to know when we drop a new episode. And trust me, you want to be the first to know.